Welcome back to Shaboom. Lots to know and love about baby boomers on this show. I am Rick K. Jones, the pirate captain and your host of this podcast. Today we're going to talk about women. I love to talk about women, but we're going to talk about how women may finally have gotten their justified due in our administration, in our generation. I know this, both my mother and my mother-in-law, had they been born in other eras, had they been Gen Xers or younger, they would have both been CEOs because they were both so accomplished. But in that era, it just wasn't one of the options. And one of the byproducts for baby boomers of women of previous generations is that we had such great teachers. And the reason is there weren't a lot of choices for women in the workforce, and great accomplished women became school teachers. And I owe so much of my education to a myriad of women that were great teachers. It seems like the ones that I remember most fondly were all English teachers. I loved to read, I loved English, I loved literature, and I had great English teachers, Elizabeth Kyle, Sally Franz. My favorite was Karen Benson, who was my sophomore year in high school English teacher. I remember we read Catcher in the Rye, J.D. Salinger's classic, and we read Franny and Zoe, another J.D. Salinger. We read a thing called A Separate Peace, John Knowles. Just great memories of that era. Again, women did begin to accomplish a lot in that era, but they really were not rewarded for their talents. And even baby boomer women that are out there listening today, you didn't get your just desserts, but you did look at your kids and your girls and said you wanted more for them. My mom used to remind me that Ginger Rogers, the classic actress, did everything Fred Astaire did, but she did it backwards and in high heels. And if you think about that, there's a lot of truth to that. But during our era, Virginia Slims made a cigarette just for women. Philip Morris, Virginia Slims, and their tagline was, "You've come a long way, baby." And women have come a long way. So I'm affectionately calling this episode the Estrogen Explosion. If you listen to our weekly playlist, it's now time to listen to a great song called I'm Every Woman. The version we're playing today is the great Whitney Houston version from the soundtrack of the movie The Bodyguard. The song was originally recorded by the great Chaka Khan, and in this version, at one point, Whitney Houston plays homage to Chaka Khan in this version. So listen to that on our playlist today. I hope you will listen to our playlist on a regular basis. Really, the songs are complementary to a lot of the subject matter that we do, and we've taken a lot of pride in the songs that we've picked out and while we've picked them out. The modern day women's movement probably began with the Second World War. So many men went off to fight the war, to fight the Germans and the Japanese, and women were left to largely work in the factories. My grandmother, my mother's mother, she first worked in a munitions factory in Augusta, Georgia during the First World War. And she met a soldier from New York who had come to Fort Gordon, which has now been changed to Fort Eisenhower, and they fell in love and got married. He passed away, sadly, when my mother was 3, and then the Second World War broke out, and my grandmother went back to the same munitions plant in Augusta and made weapons again during the Second World War. But when the men came home, a lot of those jobs went away. And women, again, loved their independence. They had learned that they could be very, very productive. And as I mentioned before, a lot of them reared their girls to be different, to expect more, to demand more, even to dream more about what they could accomplish. And from that point on, we've seen, rightfully so, women begin to achieve in ways that hadn't happened in previous generations. Some women of that ilk did pursue careers. I'm reminded of a story of Ruth Chris's Steakhouse. There was a woman named Ruth Fertile, and in 1965, she actually mortgaged her home because she couldn't get a bank loan. She mortgaged her home, got a second mortgage on her home, to buy a small restaurant in New Orleans called Chris's Steakhouse. And she changed the name of it to Ruth Chris Steakhouse after a fire. A fire forced her to move, and when she reopened, she said, I'm going to put my name on it too. I've done all this. And she combined her name with the original owner's name. And over the years, Ruth Chris's Steakhouse has grown into a renowned fine dining establishment known for its high-quality steaks, exceptional service. It operates numerous locations across the United States and internationally. So baby boomer women did pursue lots of new opportunities, and during their lifetimes, we saw significant changes in opportunities. Clearly, the birth control pill changed the game for women. Before that, good luck. You could get pregnant at any time. The pill changed that. It allowed women to pursue careers, to begin to have children on their terms, at their pace, and that changed a lot. There's a great Diana Ross song that we've got on the playlist today that talks about these new opportunities for women. It's the classic song, I'm Coming Out. Now, I had no sisters, but I did have lots of strong women in my life. But you may ask, okay, if you didn't have any sisters, you had strong women in your life. Rick, when did you become a feminist? It's pretty easy, when my daughter was born. That'll change everything. We had nothing but boys growing up, and now suddenly we have this baby girl in the family. And at that point, of course you want her to have the same opportunities. And of course, my baby girl has grown up to be a renowned published author. And I'm very, very proud of her and her career and the things that she's doing with her life. I'm also proud that I supported a lot of women throughout my career in sports marketing and sponsorship marketing. You heard Lisa Murray, who was one of our guests earlier, talk about her career and the fact that so many men in her life had been instrumental to helping her succeed, and she never felt like she was second class in any way. And I'm honored to have been part of that. We really saw changes in our generation in sports. First, really, tennis was the forefront to that. Billie Jean King, the great Billie Jean King, came along in tennis, and she rallied the other professional tennis players to boycott tournaments until they had equal pay with the men. Now, mathematically, the men would always play 5 sets and the women would play 3 sets. And so there was some controversy about, who played the longest and who deserved more money. But Billie Jean insisted that the women be paid the same amount of money at Wimbledon, at the French Open, at the other tournaments. And she got that to happen. And that revolution led for more money and more opportunities for the players that came behind her, Chris Evert, Martina Navratilova. They made a lot of money in their careers. But other sports were slow to come around. Really, Title IX was passed by baby boomers, baby boomer legislators. And we're going to talk a little bit about that with my very special guest today, Carol Stiff. But first, let's listen to the Tom Petty classic, American Girl, on our playlist. My guest today, Carol Stiff, is the president of the Women's Sports Network. She previously spent decades as the highest executive for women's sports at ESPN. She's a proud baby boomer and a very accomplished female executive. Let's welcome my friend Carol Stiff to Shaboom. Carol, I'm glad you're here.
Happy to be here.
Let's go back to your childhood. This is a show about baby boomers. I don't know if we were just kids and thought it was better back then, but it seemed like we all had these unique kind of ideal childhoods. Talk about your childhood a little bit.
I was the youngest of six, good Irish Catholic family, and we were living in New Jersey. We had all been born in Toledo, but when I was two, they moved us to Jersey, and there were no girls in the neighborhood growing up, all boys, and so sports was part of the DNA of our neighborhood. So I picked up a basketball, went down the street to this family home that had a really good court, and I whipped the ass out of the guys. So basketball came really, really easy to me. We played baseball and a little bit of football until touch football was illegal. So I ended up going to Catholic grammar school and playing CYO basketball, which stands for I think Christian Youth
Yep,
Organization
yep,
basketball.
yep.
My very first coach was a nun, but I call it the cool nun, and she's in a lot of my bio stories because she went to University of Dayton, Dayton Flyers, where my uncle coached the basketball team. And so she graduated after college, so that means she did a little bit of, curls with the 12-ounce curls. And so then became a nun. And so she was really, really unbelievable, great teacher. And so I ended up playing CYO and then high school and then, on to college. And then when I graduated from college, I got this coaching gig at Western Connecticut, only 21 years old, coaching field hockey and assisting in basketball and cooking in a restaurant and teaching elementary, phys ed to make enough gas to put in the big old Impala. And from there, I went on to coaching at Brown University. And then in whatever, I think I'm going too far from my youth, I ended up leaving the coaching ranks and going to ESPN.
Well, you were there at the early days of ESPN, and you really were the pioneer. You may have been the sole voice of of being a cheerleader for women's sports at a time. Again, the emergence, Title IX really changed things, in my opinion. I think the legislation. I don't think it was really written to be an equalizer in sport at all. It was really about pay and equal opportunity, but clearly women's athletics, women's sports benefited because now you had to offer a similar amount of sports, similar amount of access. I think we're seeing the blossoming now of women's sports because of Title IX, and really our generation was who passed that. Think about your career. It was kind of a anomaly of playing college basketball. There were not that many women's college basketball programs. Let me ask you this: when you first started playing, I'm gonna date myself. When I was in high school, the girls, we call them girls,
Yeah.
still played 3-on-3. You had six girls on the court. Three never crossed the midcourt line. They just played defense. Three played offense on the other end. And then I want to say it was my junior year in high school, they adapted to something called the Rover. And the Rover was the one girl that played both ends and I mean, it was crazy. And I think maybe into the late 90s, they continued to play that way in Iowa. I think was a state that was huge in women's basketball, but it was totally different. And then finally somebody said, you know what, let's let them play 5-on-5 just like everybody else. When you were playing, was that some of that during that era?
Well, I actually benefited from Title IX, which, as you're absolutely right, it was not meant for athletics. Actually, let me tell the quick story here. Birch Bayh married young. He was a senator from Indiana, and his wife said, I think I want to go back and get a law degree, or maybe it was a doctorate in medicine. And he said, yeah, go for it, honey. And she said, no, I can't. I'm not allowed to. And he goes, what? What? And he goes, no, I'm a female and I'm not allowed to study those curriculums. So he's the guy that actually, there were some activists that wanted to go up on the Hill with Birch to get this amendment passed. And he said, no, lay low, because once this goes through, it's going to affect athletics. So he got the ball across the end line on that one. But when I played in the late 70s, I really benefited from Title IX. I actually got Chuck Taylor high top sneakers that kids wear nowadays to the, dance and bars. And the boys got sneakers, we got sneakers. So my high school was way ahead of the curveball on that. So I did not play the rover ball at all. I played 5-on-5, starting with CYO, as I already
Yeah, I
mentioned.
graduated from
Yep.
high school in 72, so I want to say that like 69, they were still playing 3-on-3, and then 70 was when they went rover, and then I think maybe about 74 was the time that they were playing 5-on-5. I'll tell a quick story about Chuck Taylor's. So I'm going out for basketball as an 8th grader, and I went to an elementary school that was grades 1 through 7, and high school was grades 8 through 12. There was no middle school. And so, 8th graders going into a high school setting, a little intimidating because you had, really big kids. So I'm going out for 8th grade basketball, and I told my mother I need a new pair of shoes. I guess it was about 10 o'clock that morning. I was like, oh my God, my mother knows nothing about shoes. I'm going to be so embarrassed. I know she's going to go out and buy me red PF Flyers or something horrible. And it was like the worst day of my life. I just agonized all day long, and the bell rings, and I slowly walk out to the parking lot, and my mom's there, and she hands me a green Rich's bag, Rich's department store in Atlanta, and I'm like, oh. And I open the bag, and there's a brand new pair of Chuck Taylor high top, and I was like, I'll do anything
Love you,
for my
Mama.
mother forever. She knew more than I had thought she knew.
Let me, if I could just tell you one quick story. So when I got to college, we played in Converse, but let me just give you a good example for the people listening about Title IX and how it influences nowadays. So I won't even get into NIL and all that. But my daughter was in high school and she was playing on the girls' soccer team here in Farmington, Connecticut. She came home from school and she said to me, I can't get algebra help after school. So I said, well, why not? And she goes, because our girls' soccer team has to get on the bus and go across town to play on the soccer fields. And I said, well, where's Johnny going from the boys' soccer team? Oh, Johnny's going right out the back door and playing on the fields behind the high school. And I said, Jillian, that's a violation of Title IX. And she rolled her eyes back. Oh, here we go. Here we go. So I ended up talking to the athletic director, and he got really mad at me. So I ended up I bumped into the superintendent at a fundraiser, and I said, you're in violation of Title IX. Did you know that? And she goes, no, I didn't know that. And a female superintendent, by the way. And I said, well, I have like a solution to the problem. I'm not coming here with all problems. And she said, well, what's the solution? I said, rotate the bus every other week. And she said, brilliant. And that's what they did. So this past year, now she's out of college now and has moved on and not playing soccer. And I asked her, someone came to the door knocking for my vote for Board of Education. I said, I have a question for you. Are they still rotating the soccer bus? So after I left, and she said, yeah, they are. So that is a perfect
Yeah,
example
it
of
is.
Johnny getting a better education because of his sex, his gender.
Well, you go to ESPN, and early on, you did realize there is an audience for women's sports. The problem is, it's not a good audience when they put you up against NFL games on a network, or if they put you on at 11 p.m. Eastern time. I mean, I think that was one of the things that you were constantly trying to say. If you'll give us a shot in a real place. And was it maybe some of the women's games on Big Monday that was finally the way that kind of proved, and everybody went, oh my God, did you see the rating last night for the Connecticut-Tennessee game on Monday night? And he was like, yeah, I did see the ratings. Talk about that a little bit and how that was such a challenge.
Well, it was such a vicious little cycle that was going on. So yes, you're absolutely right with your history lesson there. I was given all the Sunday afternoon slots up against the NFL, up against the NBA, up against Tiger Woods, NASCAR, name it. And then that moved forward. Like all those highlights had to hit Sports Center. So my 1 versus 3 or my 1 versus 2 game on Sunday afternoon didn't even make Sports Center because all those highlights had to get in. So long and behold, we get the NCAA tournament. Diana Taurasi comes along from UConn. And I remember going down to the studio area, and I could hear the guys talking about, she plays like a guy. Have you seen this Diana Taurasi? And everyone was really into her game. She graduated, and the ratings were fabulous for the NCAA championships on the network. So that allowed me to go into John Wildhack and say, see these ratings? We can get those. Can I please, please, please have a prime time Monday through Friday window? And he said, yeah, why don't you take Monday night on ESPN2? I said, okay, that's for everyone out there, that's lower amount of eyeballs on the game. I took it, ran with it, moved all my great games from Sunday afternoon over to Monday night. Yes, UConn, Tennessee, but it was up against ACC, Mike Krzyzewski and Dean Smith and name it, and Big East games and Big 12 games. So I still had a little bit of a fight in me with that, but I took it. We named it Big Monday. It went on and on and on. We grew the women's tournament from those numbers. And then when I left, we were given Thursday night on ESPN plus Monday night. So my quote is, if you build it, they will come. And then the last story I have is when the NCAA tournament moved us, because we tried to get away from the men's but stayed married to the men on the days of the night. So we went Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday in the early rounds. I'm not going to get into the weeds too much, but that moved the Final Four to Sunday, Tuesday. So Tuesday night, the night after the men's championship game, we were the last college game to be played for a national championship. And so the NCAA didn't like that format, moved us back to Friday, Sunday. We had to move the early rounds back a day. And what that did was NBA was already on Friday night on ESPN, regular season NBA. So now the semifinals, the national semifinals, one and done basketball is on ESPN2. So first year we outrate the NBA. Of course, probably my Knicks were on, but they're doing better now. And then the second year, we outrated the NBA. And so finally, I was able to go into our chief at the time was Burke Magnus and go, look, we're outrating the NBA. Come on. Can I have overtime basketball with Notre Dame, UConn, LSU, whoever, back in that window? And he said, go for it until you can tell me you can replace those NBA games with other windows. I already did that. I already did the work. So we moved them back, and now look at the numbers. Outrating CBS, not this past year, but the year before for the national championship game.
Well, it's interesting. 2 years ago in Phoenix, CBS always hosts a Sunday party for advertisers and people in the deal. No one ate. No one visited. Everyone crowded around to watch the women's game. I mean, it was like unbelievable. It was like a change in behaviors. And obviously, Caitlin Clark is a generational player. I'm, again, old enough to remember I started my coaching career as college coach in '79, and that was the year of Larry Bird and Magic Johnson in the men's game, and that captivated everybody. Indiana State had gone undefeated with this unbelievable white player named Larry Bird, and he plays, Magic in the championship game, and it raked. And that really, in my opinion, took March Madness to another level for the men. She just did that over 2 years where everybody was captivated by her game. Talk about her influence and what's going on now with the WNBA. I mean, they sell out every game she plays. It's like they're like the Rolling Stones. I mean, they show up and people are there to get their autographs when they get off the bus. Talk a little bit about her.
Yeah, she was a godsend, really, really. Just the example that you used with Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. I mean, what benefited Caitlin are two things. One was the COVID year. Lisa Bluter, her coach at Iowa, they worked out as much as possible and fine-tuned her game, and that helped. And so, yeah, I mean, she's a baller for sure, and she's our Tiger Woods, if you want to use another example. I mean, she is the Michael Jordan of women's basketball. And yeah, they're selling out every game. Unfortunately, she is hurt right now, first time ever, missing any games. I had an opportunity to talk to her mom at a panel. We went back and did a panel discussion in Iowa about the growth of women's sports. And her mom, I asked her, I said, where did she get her media training? Because it's exceptional. Her first year in the WNBA, really, really introduced to some harsh welcome to the league from the other players, some physical abuse, in my opinion. And she just never took the bait. She never, ever took the bait. And I said, where did she get that training? And her mother said she had zero training in media. That's all her. So that warmed my heart even more. But she's a
Yeah, that
competitor.
level of authenticity, you just can't. I mean, you can't. You'd like to bottle it for everybody. Just be yourself and do the right thing. But she also seems to be somebody that understands at a very young age that for a lot of young girls, she really is a role model. And when you're a role model, there's a certain expectation of your behavior. And it's not only your behavior on the court, it's your behavior off the court. And are you going to be somebody that, and that's hard sometimes because I think sometimes if she misses a shot, somebody goes, well, what? We all miss shots. I mean, she's not perfect, but,
Right.
but she
Yes.
can really play. And
Yep.
I tell everybody, I grew up wanting to be Pete Maravich. And I mean, I wore floppy socks. I wore number 44. I had long hair. I mean, I wanted to be Maravich. As great a scorer as Maravich was, he was a better passer. And she is an amazing passer. I mean,
She
she's
is.
like a Maravich type passer that if you're not ready, you may get your nose broken
Yeah.
because she distributes the ball where it's supposed to go on time better than any female player I've ever seen.
No, I can't disagree with you on that. I know she got a lot of when her for rookie season first few months, she got tagged with a lot of turnovers, and I'm like, those players weren't ready to catch the ball. So anyhow, she's just a great human being and a great role model.
Well, you've got to be gratified because you really laid the groundwork. I mean, you did, and I think back to, my friendships with people like Pat Summitt and Gino and just, people that refuse to accept mediocrity, refuse to accept any limitations. I'm going to build a program that's going to be as good as anybody else's program. And what I did love about your time at ESPN is the production value was great. When you got the women's tournament, it was ESPN's tournament. And I felt like you got your best effort of all the stuff, camera angles, just everything that was there that I think elevated the game. And you got to be really pleased now to see a lot of the fruits of your labor, a long night of labor, come to fruition.
Yes, I often took the time to be in this when we were doing 48 games in 4 days, the first weekend of the tournament. I was right in there in the studio area, taking phone calls if people weren't getting the right game. But I stayed till 1 or 2 in the morning, and worked directly with those that were touching the product and producing the product and storylining. And I said, I heard this story from a coach. Did you add this? So I didn't stay up in the ivory tower and just program the games. I was part of the cast that produced those games as well. And I continue to do that with I did that with the WNBA as well. I mean, we put mics on players when Cheryl Swoops was playing. We used a lot of technology on the court with the WNBA that the NBA ended up using. So we were like the test pilot. But, I always said, I can ask. I remember one time we were told, no, you cannot have a lipstick microphone on the bench during the NCAA tournament. And sure enough, a producer pushed the envelope, and right before the tip of the national semifinals, the selection committee does a walkthrough. And I'll never forget it. One of the committee members, big tall woman out of Texas, Dana Kraft, she saw the microphone. And she picked it up off the floor and threw it. I said, okay, got it. So I was very much the in-between person to keep the peace and push the envelope.
Well, you have to do that, and I described earlier in the podcast today. My mother used to say that she would remind me that Ginger Rogers did everything Fred Astaire did, but she did it backwards and in high heels. And in a lot of ways, that was the career of trying to push women's sports. You had to do it backwards and in high heels, and you could never let them see you sweat. You wanted to push the envelope, but unfortunately, we still have the stigma that a powerful woman can be called a bitch. And a powerful man is called a powerful man. I mean, and so you did have to walk that fine line of placating a lot of masters. People at ESPN, people at affiliates, people in intercollegiate athletics, that were still a lot of men making decisions in intercollegiate athletics. I know you're good friends with Val Ackerman. Val's one of my favorite people. The job she's done at the Big East is absolutely amazing. And I think Bernadette McGlade, to a certain extent, at the A10 too. Again, you give women an opportunity. If you give women the same opportunity, not a different opportunity, you're going to see success. Talk
Absolutely.
a little bit about that.
So let me go back to that story about Big Monday with John Wildhack. I didn't go in there and say, I demand a primetime window. I always often went in and said, hey, women's basketball is doing really well. See these ratings? What do you think we could do to grow it? Is there a night of the week? Like I made it like a puzzle, and he made him come up with the solution. Why don't you take Monday night, Carol? I go, brilliant. Thank you. Great. Onward. And I often did that with allies outside the company. So if I would go in with an idea for softball or whatever, and then an inbound call came in from, the SEC commissioner or the ACC commissioner, which are all men, to my higher ups. Have you thought about expanding the, NCAA softball championship? I heard it's rating really, really well. And that I had already placed that seed. I think we could add a whole super regional round if you look at these numbers. So the reinforcement from outside the company often helped. And then the last thing I often did was, before going into a meeting, I'd get some guys that were allies and talk them through what I was going to pitch. And do you agree with me or disagree? And often agreed. And that helped as well.
Well, one of the frustrations I had, we were fortunate to work for both the National Association of Basketball Coaches and the Women's Basketball Coaches Association. And I would go to the corporate partners and say, look, I'm not asking you to have parity spending, but spend some money in women's basketball. I mean, just spend something. And Beth Bass at the time was great about that. Beth didn't expect AT&T to spend the same kind of money they were spending in men's, but just spend something. And I would say to them, guys, it's like an insurance policy. You're negligent in your not being there, when you talk about, how you went in and changed behaviors. One of my favorite literary characters is there was a Southern writer named Joel Chandler Harris, and he wrote the Uncle Remus stories. And the hero is a character called Burr Rabbit, and Burr Rabbit would say, "Please don't throw me in the briar patch." Well, Burr Rabbit lived in the briar patch. He would fool you into that, and in a lot of ways, you had to be the Burr Rabbit. You had to say, "Oh, please don't put me there," when that's exactly where you wanted to go. But it did frustrate me that a lot of brands would not spend any money. It made me crazy, but I'm seeing a turn now. I mean, because they realize, I've been preaching this for decades, women are the chief financial officers of the family. They spend all the money. And, Ally, I'm really proud of Ally. They came in and said, we're going to put our money where our mouth is. They've grown market share. It's really worked. You're seeing more and more brands now that are doing that. And now in your role at the Women's Sports Network, are you beginning to see that finally, that, that advertisers, or are we not there yet still?
Great point to make, and that was my number one frustration when I left ESPN was all the hours of women's sports that were on our family of networks, and we were starting to get better windows, but no one in the sales department would listen. No one would go out there, and I often called it the low-hanging fruit. Along with tennis and golf and other sports. So I had this idea, you'd love this. Why don't we hire some eager beavers? I didn't say young, I said eager beavers. Have a red team and a blue team. Have them go out and give them all the tools they need to sell the low-hanging fruit. And then if the red team wins, they get full-time jobs in the sales department. And I got laughed out of the room when I brought that idea up. But you're seeing spending at the highest level with the ESPNs, a little bit of NBC, CBS, Fox. You're starting to see it as they're adding more women's sports hours, I might add. At our level, we're not there yet. We're not getting the knocking on the door. I think there's a double standard going on here where we have to show all the numbers, all the metrics, more than what we have to do on the men's side. So it's sort of still a little low-hanging fruit, still not being, because I believe our network, Women's Sports Network will never have the infrastructure for now to purchase rights to the WNBA, the NWSL, the big majors in women's sports. But remember, all those networks go from one event to the next, to the next, to the next. They go from NFL to a soccer game to a basketball game, and they don't let the stories breathe. Yes, they breathe on SportsCenter if you go there now. But in women's sports, there's unbelievable amount of stories that still are not being told. And I think that's our role with the Women's Sports Network. A few live hours, but use our studio to storytell and let those live hours breathe. And what's that going to do, Rick? That's going to get people interested in those stories and then go watch where they're spending the money on ESPN and NBC and CBS. So we're still not there yet. If you can help me in any way, please. I'm trying to get...
It's years ago, at the height of ESPN, we used to laugh and say nobody ever got fired by buying ESPN. I mean, it became an easy solution for people, but sometimes I felt like it was too easy a solution that people were thoughtless. They took the road less, the road more traveled, and they took the easy way out rather than saying, look, what can I do with my brand that can, and that's why I'm so proud of Ally. Ally, in a very competitive financial services, banks, unbelievably competitive, said, I'm going to double down here and see what happens. And the proof is in the pudding, and I think people are beginning to follow it from that standpoint and beginning to see, what can happen. I am watching.
Let me just add one more thing there.
Yeah.
The buyer for Ally, or the spender, I should say, not buyer. The spender played soccer in Michigan State, and she's a female. Drop the mic.
Yeah. And I think we see that you have to have a little bit of a personal bias from that standpoint. But we went through about a decade where women executives felt like if they needed to act more like men. And if they showed favoritism towards women's sports, they were going to be ostracized. I remember going to one unnamed female executive, trying to get her to buy women's basketball. And I said, you need to buy women's basketball. She said, I can't appear to be biased. I said, men have been biased for 10,000 years. What part of that don't you get? It's okay to be biased. You should proudly be biased. Somebody needs to be the champion, and it needs to be you. Still couldn't do it. Still, but I think you're seeing a new generation of women's leaders that have come out of athletics and are seeing things and are seeing the changes. I am really watching direct to consumer, and at some point, I think women's sports is going to really benefit because I think there is a big demand for that when you can get it through your smartphone and you can demand it and on a subscription basis, I'm really intrigued by what that's going to look like. I tell everybody the new model, the old affiliate model, the middleman model's dead. The new model is how do you identify your tribe? How do you communicate with your tribe? How do you engage with your tribe? And then ultimately, how do you monetize your tribe? And I think women's sports can begin to do that. And I think it can happen at the grassroots level as we begin to try to tell these stories that help a new generation understand I can succeed and be successful. And here's the thing. It's not just about success in sport. It's success in life. I mean, I still am old-fashioned to believe that what you learned in sport has carryover value to everything that you do in your life. And the more girls that participate in athletics, you have less teen pregnancies, you have less dropouts. I mean, all the metrics are there. All the numbers are there that say we change lives by putting young girls in positions to be successful. And when they see that they are not treated as second-class citizens, that they get the same rights and benefits that their boyfriends get, then it works, and it works for everybody. I said earlier today, I grew up 3 boys, no sisters, and somebody said to me, when did you become a feminist, Rick? I said, the day my daughter was born. I mean, that's pretty simple. That was the day. At that point, I'm looking at her going, I want her to have the same opportunities that everybody else has.
Right.
And I think, it's kind of true, but I do know there's some pioneering thing. Well, we got a few minutes left, so I want to talk some fun things. Who was your favorite athlete of all time and why?
Walt Frazier, New York
Atlanta,
Knickerbockers.
Georgia boy.
He
Decatur,
was?
Georgia.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Went to Howard at an all-black school, Howard High School, Decatur, Georgia. Jim Crow era, no scholarships in the South. Clyde Frazier went north to school.
I'll be. Let me back up on that answer. My first role model, because I had to do a 3rd grade book, report, was Wilma Rudolph. She just, I didn't see her run or any of that. I don't remember seeing her run, but her story just grabbed me. But growing up and playing basketball in CYO, I was Walt Frazier with the wristbands, number 10, all the moves, and I had an opportunity to meet him a few years ago at the Basketball Hall of Fame inductions, and I have a picture with him.
Yeah. I mean, I love that Knicks team.
Oh,
I mean, they were so unselfish, Frazier, they Dick Barnett and
Earl Pearl,
Earl the Pearl
Monroe,
and then they had DeBusschere and Bradley and Willis Reed and
Reed.
I mean, it was just Red Holtzman was share the ball, play without the ball, offensively without the ball, set yourself up. For years, I coached. After I had gotten out of coaching, it was building the agencies. I coached 8th grade boys basketball, and I used Bill Bradley's book "Values of the Game" as my textbook because I wanted the kids to understand you learn life skills from basketball. But I love that Knicks team too, and I'm delighted the Knicks had a great season this year. And in my opinion, it's important for the NBA for New York to be relevant. Again.
The other person I should say is when I went to the Garden, my mother saved up enough money to take her last child to a basketball game at the Garden. It was a doubleheader women's basketball, and I saw Montclair State. Carol Blazejowski hit 52 points in the Garden, and she owned that record. And by the way, she will remind you, she also had a double in rebounding, and there was no 3-point line. She's very serious about that record, but I think Kobe broke it just a few years ago.
What was your favorite sporting event you attended and why?
As an executive at ESPN, my favorite event was the Special Olympics in LA. And while I was in the crowd and watching those athletes come in, brought tears to my eyes. But for an event on the court, it had to be the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta when we won our first gold medal.
Well, two quick stories. Debbie Antonelli's both of our good friends, and she does an amazing job raising money for Special Olympics still with her free throw challenge, and she's been on our podcast a couple times, and just a really good friend. And then you'll appreciate this. We've just launched a new film, a new documentary called "The Games in Black and White" that we got Delta Airlines to underwrite. And it's the story of the friendship between Billy Payne and Andy Young that brought the games to Atlanta. It will run on Delta Airlines. The games in black and white. It's going to run on PBS, going to run on Peacock, but it's going to run on Delta. You'll love it because it really talks about those games being the coming of age of women Olympians. And it tells a great story of all the female, and a lot of that, Billy Payne, people forget this. When they first went for the bid, he had 3 women working for him, and they unaffectionately, called the bid because there was no way Atlanta was going to win the games. They called that group Billy and the Girl Scouts, which I just still laugh about, but they got it done. And one of the things about those games in '96 was they absolutely treated the women athletes exactly like the men's athletes for the first time, maybe in the history of the Olympic Games. And of course, you had great stories with women's basketball, women's soccer, women's gymnastics. I mean, it went on and on and on. We had more women participate in the Olympic Games in '96 than any time before. We had more medals won by women, American women, than ever before. So great selection of.
So there's my last story of those. I was given an award, and Dick Embersol was given an award. It was Wise Women in These Sport Events, and we were in New York City, and I publicly thanked him for programming. The final event of those Olympics was the women's basketball game, I guess, against Brazil. And it was the final event before the closing ceremonies. And so when I sat down next to him and Susan St. James, he said, he sent me a note. He goes, David Stern and I already had that planned before the game started. I went, oh, yeah, it was great.
Well, again, some people like you had vision. And, there's a verse in Proverbs that said, without the vision, the people perish. Somebody has to have the vision of not where we are today, but where we can go. And you had that at ESPN. You still have it today at the Women's Sports Network. I can't thank you enough for what you've done for women's sports. You're a dear friend, and thank you for being with us today on Shaboom.
Thank you.
Speaking of changes still needed, the fight for equality is never over, especially around the world. I'm amazed at how many cultures still today demean women. They put women in positions of being second-class citizens, especially in the Middle East and other cultures where women are not considered to be equal to men. I have a wonderful and poignant song on our playlist today about the plight of women. It's the great Nina Simone's classic, Ain't No Way. I'd like you to listen to the words about women in this song. It's time to take that fun trip down memory lane. In 1980, a really fun and funny movie came out called 9 to 5. It starred Lily Tomlin, Jane Fonda, Dabney Coleman, and the great Dolly Parton. Dolly is such an American treasure. She's an entertainer, a songwriter, a humanitarian. She started a theme park, Dollywood, that employs thousands of people up in her hometown of Seaverville and Pigeon Forge, that area. Dolly recently lost her husband. They've been married for decades. A lot of our generation are losing spouses these days. I remember Dolly Parton when she was in her early 20s. She was on the Porter Wagner show, and she did commercials for Breeze laundry detergent. Breeze detergent, you would buy a box of Breeze detergent, and in the box of detergent would be a towel, like a kitchen towel. And our tagline was, "You can only get it in boxes of Breeze detergent." That's how far I go back with Dolly Parton. She wrote the song 9 to 5. She recorded it. It was nominated for a variety of awards, including Grammys and Song of the Year in country music. That song is on our playlist this week. Let's get back on the road with Rick. Right now, my son Ryan and I are traveling all over the country, filming a television series, a vignette series called United Taste of America. And what we're doing is we're going to each of the 50 states. We're selecting one iconic dish from that state. And we're talking about the history of that dish, like shrimp and grits in South Carolina. And then we go to one restaurant where they prepare the dish. Recently, we filmed in Atlanta at a place called Mary Mac's Tea Room. And at Mary Mac's, we filmed their very famous peach cobbler. Obviously, Georgia's a peach state. We will be having later this summer a podcast series called United Taste of America, where we will go deep into each of the culinary traditions and histories of each of the 50 states. Mary Mac's is an interesting story. Again, we talked about women coming out of the Second World War. Well, there was a woman named Mary McKenzie who had worked in a plant in Atlanta, and in 1945, she wanted to open a restaurant. She was a widow. There were a lot of war widows, and they needed to go to work to take care of their families. But it was frowned upon for women to own restaurants. So what she did was she didn't call it a restaurant, she called it a tea room, Mary Mac's Tea Room. And at that era, there were 16 different tea rooms in Atlanta. There's only one left, Mary Mac's. I grew up eating at Mary Mac's. It's on Ponce de Leon Avenue. My grandfather drove first a streetcar, then a trackless trolley, and later a bus on Ponce de Leon Avenue. And so that was one of the places that we would occasionally get to go and eat. It's interesting. They have a huge menu. It's a classic meat and three place, but you still fill out what you want to eat on a little notepad. And so you sit at the table and say, "I want fried chicken and green beans and fried okra and cornbread," and you check it off and hand it to your waitress and you do that kind of thing. Margaret McKenzie ran it for decades, and then she was followed by a woman named Margaret Lupo, who ran it even longer than Mary McKenzie. This place serves incredible food. They have a black chef who's been there 22 years, fried chicken, chicken and dumplings, meatloaf, a bunch of vegetables, great desserts. It's Mary Mac's, Ponce de Leon Avenue, Atlanta, Georgia, on the road with Rick. It's now time for the Song of the Week. A few decades ago, I had the privilege of running as the agency sponsorship programs for Sears. Some of y'all are like, "Who? What's Sears?" You may not remember Sears, but for baby boomers, we remember Sears. Sears and Roebuck, as it was called, was the definitive department store in America. It was the source of the American dream. Way before Walmart, way before Kmart, way before Macy's, even nationally, yet Sears. There are houses that you could order from Sears. In my wife's little town of Live Oak on Ohio Avenue, there are two houses that from the 1920s that were mail order houses that were delivered by Sears. Can you believe that? Sears. And later they got into the car insurance business, and they founded a company called Allstate. That was Sears. They formed a company called Budget Rental Car. That was Sears. When we were doing the sponsorship programs for Sears, there was a brilliant marketer, CMO named John Costello. John had been at Pepsi. He later was at Home Depot. Probably one of the great marketers of my career, and a guy I looked up to and wanted to emulate and had great respect for, with one exception. John wanted Sears to get involved with music. And the first artist we chose was Phil Collins. And Phil Collins had been the drummer for a band called Genesis and had gone out on his own and was a huge pop star in that era. And the sole objective for Sears sponsoring Phil Collins was for people to go, I can't believe Sears did Phil Collins. It was to change the perspective of Sears. This was the time that Sears had launched a campaign called The Softer Side of Sears. People knew Sears for their tools and for their tires and for a lot of other things, didn't really know them for clothes and soft goods. And they created a campaign aimed at women to buy more soft goods, more clothing, and that kind of thing. Well, later on, we did Christina Aguilera. We did Brian McKnight. We did Backstreet Boys. Well, I did my research, and I went to John Costello and said, John, 72% of Sears customers prefer country music over any other genre. And John said to me, Rick, I don't like country music. Now, I wanted to say I didn't because I had too much respect for John. John, you don't buy your suits at Sears either. You're not the customer. The customer, by the data, says they prefer country music. Well, I tried. I said, I'm going to fool him. I'm going to bring in an artist. It's kind of a crossover artist. This artist had worked at Sears, believe it or not, in her teenage years and early 20s in Canada. Cute, great figure, great personality. I brought her into Sears, and John Costello still said no to Shania Twain. And this was right before Shania Twain's first album went quadruple platinum. Let's play one of Shania's songs. The song of the week is Man, I Feel Like a Woman. It's now time for Wine and Wine. You know, women have become great winemakers. Suddenly, women have discovered wines. And one of my favorites is a woman named Linda Trotter. She's the head winemaker at Jameson Ranch Vineyards in Sonoma. If you have a chance to go to Sonoma, you got to go to Jameson Ranch. And she is a wonderful winemaker. Try their 2018 Whiplash Red Blend. It's a blended wine of a bunch of grapes. It's great with charcuterie. It's great with pork tacos. It's great with barbecue. All right, what's my wine today? I'm convinced that the single thing that's holding women back today is the lack of appropriate and affordable childcare. It's almost a crisis in America. If you want to get women lifted from poverty, figure out a way they can have children and raise their children and have a career at the same time. And so it's not enough just to have childcare. It's affordable childcare, and it's appropriate childcare. And I want to tell you a quick story about my friend Beth Gendler down in Gulf Shores, Orange Beach. Beth runs the Convention and Visitors Bureau down there. Gulf Shores, Orange Beach is a wonderful place to go year-round, but it's really a seasonal business. It is a summertime beach resort. And so during the summer months, the warm weather months, when people want to come to the beach, that's when the bars and restaurants are open and in full swing. They have a hard time hiring waitresses, hiring kitchen staff, and certainly hiring bartenders. And they really have a hard time hiring women because they work weird hours. A woman bartender at a beach resort may work till 1 o'clock in the morning. Who's going to take care of her children? Well, Beth has figured out something and is in the process of partnering with Beaver Creek, Colorado. Beaver Creek, when is their high season? It's when Gulf Shores, Orange Beach has their low season. So in Beaver Creek during the ski season, and so she's working on a plan where you could work 6 months of the year in Beaver Creek, 6 months of the year in Gulf Shores, Orange Beach, have health care, have child care, and she's working with the University of South Alabama to create some housing for those staffers that come for 6 months and have 24-hour-a-day child care, which would be great. And so we need to think differently about what we're doing if we're going to lift women up. So here's the last word for the day. One of my favorite stories is the story of mom and dad are at the football game, and it's halftime, and they're going to watch the marching band. And the band starts marching and starts playing. And then mama turns to daddy and says, "Daddy, look down there. Everybody's out of step but Johnny." A little stupid, isn't it? Well, let me tell you what I think. I think every politician I know seems to be out of step with what we all want. And so maybe it is time for a female president. My choice this last round was Nikki Haley. Maybe soon, with the right woman, we'll have a woman president. But whether it's a man or a woman in office, the final song on our playlist is really my last word for the day. It's the classic Aretha Franklin song, R-E-S-P-E-C-T, respect. We'll see you next time on Shaboom.